Lorenzo Bianchi was the CEO of one of the most prestigious architecture firms in Milan. Wealthy, admired, feared. A cold, controlling man with an ego no one dared to challenge. But one car accident changed everything. He lost his sight, and with it he lost control, his power, and the image that held everything together. Alone in the darkness, fragile, with no family around, only one person reached out a hand. Alessia, his assistant, a simple girl, almost invisible. But what Lorenzo didn't know was that Alessia didn't want him to regain his sight. Why? Come with me and discover a story that will surprise you from beginning to end. And at the end, don't forget to leave a rating from 0 to 10. I'd love to know how much you enjoyed the story. The alarm went off at exactly 5 a.m. As always, Alessia woke up on the first ring. There was no hesitation, no second chance for sleep. She got up in silence, moving through her small rented apartment in the Lamrate district with light, almost rehearsed steps. She washed her face with cold water, pulled her red hair into a low bun, put on her usual outfit, gray tailored pants and a matching blazer, with a simple white blouse underneath, and made her strong, bitter coffee. As she took her first sips, she was already reviewing the day's schedule on her tablet. Meetings with investors, a visit to a new plot in Monza, and 3 international calls. Everything was noted, confirmed, and precisely timed. This was the routine at Studio Bianchi, one of the most celebrated architecture firms in Italy, and also one of the most demanding. Alessia was the executive assistant to Lorenzo Bianchi, the company's CEO. To most people, she was a discreet cog in the machine that powered the architectural empire he built and inherited from his father. She didn't stand out. She wasn't the type to mingle at elite cocktail parties or post selfies from behind the scenes of glamorous events. She was efficient, quiet, practically invisible. She arrived at the mirrored glass building that housed the company headquarters at 6:57 a.m. She passed through reception unnoticed, as always, and went straight up to the 20th floor. As the elevator rose, she took a deep breath. She knew it would be a long day. At the top of the building, Lorenzo's office looked like a minimalist showcase overlooking all of Milan. Everything radiated precision. The clean lines of the dark furniture, the abstract paintings on the white walls, the absolute silence. Alessia switched on the indirect lights, organized the documents on his desk, prepared the Nespresso coffee capsule he preferred on Mondays, and discreetly placed the tablet with the day's summaries. At exactly 7:30 a.m., she heard the sound of the automatic door opening. "Good morning," he said, without lifting his eyes from his phone. "Good morning, Mr. Bianchi," she replied, standing tall. Lorenzo crossed the room without pausing. Tall, athletic, light brown hair artfully tousled, well-groomed beard, and a presence as commanding as the skyscraper he worked in. He dropped his briefcase on the desk, sat down, and began flipping through digital files. "Is the visit to Monza confirmed?" he asked, still looking at the screen. "Yes, the survey team will be there at 10:15. You have 27 minutes between your last meeting and the helicopter departure. Everything is scheduled." "Good," he muttered, emotionless. "It was always like this." Alessia spoke, he replied. She organized, he approved. There was nothing beyond what was necessary. And that never bothered her, at least not in the beginning. A little later, while Lorenzo met with an executive from the Scandinavian design sector, Alessia stayed outside, reviewing contracts and answering emails. She knew everyone's patterns. Who was impatient, who was overly friendly, who gave compliments just to gain favor. She knew more about the company than many of its directors. But no one knew much about her. In the rare breaks, Alessia would go over the old notebook she always carried with her. In it, she kept handwritten records, yes, handwritten, of everything she didn't trust to digital. Phrases she heard, decisions made, Lorenzo's unexpected reactions in certain situations. Not out of distrust, but out of discipline, out of the need to remember what couldn't be forgotten. At 9:53 a.m., the internal phone rang. "Alessia, come here." She entered. "I need you to take me to Monza. The driver informed me the helicopter only leaves at 11, and I don't want to waste time in traffic." "Of course, sir. I'll have the car ready in 10 minutes. And prepare the French competitor's documentation. I want to review it on the way. It's already printed and reviewed. I've also included the legal addenda for the rights transfer clause." He looked at her for half a second, perhaps surprised by her anticipation, but quickly returned his gaze to the tablet. He said nothing more. As they headed down to the garage, Lorenzo walked briskly, eyes glued to his phone. He got into the back seat of the black car, an armored Audi the company used for strategic trips. Alessia drove, as she did whenever a driver wasn't available. At the entrance to the city, part of the road was partially closed. She made the detour with ease, as if she had anticipated it. Lorenzo remained distracted, answering messages. Then, unexpectedly, a car veered into the lane against traffic. Alessia slammed the brakes. The impact was unavoidable, shattering glass, the harsh sound of metal. Silence. When Lorenzo opened his eyes again, everything was white. A constant buzzing filled his ears. He tried to move, but his body wouldn't respond clearly. "Mr. Bianchi, please stay calm. You're safe. You're at the hospital." He tried to speak, but his voice came out weak. "Don't strain yourself. You've had an accident. You're stable. But there was temporary eye trauma. I can't see anything. It's the effect of the crash. We'll monitor you." Outside, sitting in one of the corridor chairs, Alessia stared into a cup of coffee. Her hands trembled slightly, but her face remained calm. She had already informed the legal team, canceled meetings, contacted Lorenzo's family, and stayed at the hospital since his arrival. When the nurse appeared and said the patient was asking for her, Alessia stood up. She didn't know it yet, but that would be the first of many moments when her name would finally be remembered. The hospital room was shrouded in shadows, even with the lights on. For Lorenzo, everything was darkness. The absence of vision left him in a rare state of discomfort. He, who had always dominated boardrooms with a single glance, who could read reactions and intentions before a word was spoken, now depended on voices, sounds, and silence. "Mr. Bianchi?" called a familiar but timid voice. "Alessia?" he asked, his brow furrowed. "Yes, it's me. The medical team asked me to stay with you until a family member arrives, but no one from your family has returned my calls yet." There was a moment of silence, as if he were trying to piece together the information through the fog that clouded his mind. "What exactly happened? Tell me plainly." She stepped closer to the bed, clipboard in hand, even though he couldn't see her. "The car was hit on the side by a runaway vehicle. The driver was fleeing, according to the police. You suffered a mild head injury, but your eyes, they're still being evaluated. The doctor said it could be a reversible inflammation, but for now I'm blind." He finished the sentence coldly. "Temporarily," she replied cautiously. "The team is optimistic, but they need time to see how things progress." Lorenzo was silent for a few seconds. His breathing grew heavier. "I've already contacted the directors. I canceled this week's appointments and asked the vice president to handle operational decisions. I also organized the documents that were in the car. Only a small folder with copies was lost. The main materials are safe." Even in that state, Lorenzo seemed to react at the mention of the documents. Control was his language. Knowing that nothing had truly gone off track gave him a flicker of calm. "Thank you," he said, surprising even himself. In the days that followed, Lorenzo was forced to face the kind of vulnerability he had avoided his entire life. Medical visits were frequent. He tried to walk, but every step required assistance. The room became his new makeshift office, but the emails read aloud by Alessia seemed slower, less under his control. Alessia, on the other hand, skillfully filled every gap left by her boss's condition. From taking notes for meetings to preparing verbal summaries of urgent contracts. She read, summarized, organized, filtered, always with precision, always with distance. "Why have you never applied for a leadership position, Alessia?" he asked one morning, after hearing one of her concise analyses about a business partner. She hesitated before replying. "It's not something I want. I like being behind the scenes. I like the silence. Silence isn't always comfortable, but it can be a choice. For me, it has been." Lorenzo nodded, not arguing. He was beginning to notice things he used to ignore. People's tones of voice, the way they hesitated to tell the truth, the difference between those who approached out of need and those who stayed out of conviction. And Alessia was always there. Late in the afternoon on the 6th day, one of the doctors entered the room with a lighter tone. "Good news. We're starting corticosteroid treatment. There's been a slight improvement in your optic nerve responses. This could mean a gradual reversal of the blindness." "When?" Lorenzo asked, tense. "If all goes well, in 2 weeks we can test your response to light. But it's a slow process. We recommend patience." Patience, a word he never knew how to use. After the doctor left, Lorenzo let out a deep sigh. "Would you mind reading another section of the exclusivity contract with the Spanish group?" "Of course. Page 32, right? You memorized it?" "I always review everything before coming in here." "Since when?" "Always," she replied naturally. "I never noticed." Alessia didn't respond, and for the first time he felt the weight of that silence. It wasn't empty, it was heavy. It was as if all the times she had gone unnoticed had turned into a presence that now imposed itself, even without intention. On the 7th day, a meeting with international shareholders had to be held by video conference. Lorenzo insisted on participating, even though he couldn't see a thing. Alessia prepared the setup, checked the files, and stood behind the camera, out of sight, ready to whisper information if he forgot something. "I trust my team will maintain our standard of excellence," Lorenzo declared, his voice firm, eyes bandaged, like a marble statue refusing to crack. The shareholders agreed. No one dared question him. After the call, he removed the bandage from his eyes impulsively, as if something inside demanded a reaction. But everything was still dark. "Sorry," he said, and for the first time Alessia saw a sincere apology from him. "For what?" "For not noticing before. You do more than anyone here." "I'm just doing my job, Mr. Bianchi." "Still, thank you." She picked up the glass of water from the table and handed it to him in silence. His hand brushed against hers, unintentionally. This time, neither of them pulled away immediately. But nothing more was said. The following Monday, 1 week after the accident, Lorenzo Bianchi decided to return to the office. The medical team had recommended complete rest, but he could no longer stand the immobility of the hospital. Temporary blindness was a physical limit, not a sentence to inactivity, or at least that's what he tried to convince himself and everyone else. It was Alessia who picked him up. She helped him into the car with discreet, efficient movements. There was no small talk, only practical instructions. She respected his silence like few others could. On the way, Lorenzo listened to the sounds of the city as if for the first time. The screech of brakes, the distant barking of a dog, the metallic ring of a bicycle passing by on the bike lane. Things that had always been there, but he'd never really heard before. "Is it raining?" he asked suddenly. "Yes, a light drizzle. It's cold today. 10 degrees with a north wind. And the trees. Most are yellow now. Some still cling to green leaves. Others, already with bare branches." Lorenzo nodded slowly. Alessia's descriptions were precise, almost poetic. But she didn't seem to be trying. It was as if she were simply reporting the world. At the office, his arrival caused a silent tension. Employees straightened their papers more quickly, exchanged cautious glances, whispered anxiously. It was the first time they'd seen the CEO in such a state. But Lorenzo didn't need to see to notice. He sensed hesitation in the pauses of greetings, the slower footsteps around him. And, above all, he sensed that it was Alessia who anchored his presence in that space. She walked 2 steps ahead, guiding him without touching, announcing doors, mentioning steps, arranging things on his desk with surgical precision. "Is everything the same as before?" he asked, sitting carefully in the familiar leather chair. "Yes, I only rearranged the papers to make them easier to access. I left a textured strip on each folder, so you can identify them by touch." Lorenzo ran his hand over the surface, feeling the small markers. "How did you think of that?" "I thought it made sense. My brother used something similar when he had limited vision after a surgery." "You have a brother?" "I had. He passed away 3 years ago. But some things remain." Lorenzo fell silent for a moment. It was rare to hear anything personal from Alessia. The revelation came without forced emotion, without seeking attention. Just information. And yet it carried weight. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. She only nodded. She didn't want pity. She wanted functionality. But this time, Lorenzo didn't rush to change the subject. The day continued with meetings conducted by Alessia, who read documents and jotted down notes as Lorenzo dictated. Over time, the directors realized that nothing had truly changed, except that Alessia, once in the background, was now indispensable in everything. "The Spanish proposal has legal gaps in Clause 4.2, she said during a video conference. "I suggest we request adjustments before any pre-signing." "I agree," said Lorenzo from the other end of the table. "Alessia, draft the response based on the legal team's feedback. You have full authority to handle it." It was the first time she had received such direct authorization to lead a negotiation. The executives turned their attention to her with new eyes, some with surprise, others with discomfort. After the meeting, Lorenzo rested for a few minutes in his darkened office. He heard the printer, the gentle clink of a cup being placed on the side table. "Did you fall asleep?" Alessia asked. "No, I'm listening. It's like I see things through another channel now. By the way things move around me, by the sound of your voice, by the rhythm of your typing." She didn't reply. "It's strange. Before, I barely noticed your presence. Now it feels like you're everywhere." Still silent, Alessia stepped away, careful not to cross the line of comfort. But Lorenzo realized that, even without footsteps, she was still there. At the end of the workday, she walked him to the elevator. The halls were empty. Their reflections on the mirrored walls showed 2 professionals. Poised, serious, distant. "Do you need me to take you home?" she asked, professional. "No. Today I want to try on my own. I want to test my senses. See if I can get by without relying so much." "All right. If you need me, I'll be nearby." He nodded. The elevator doors closed, leaving Alessia alone in the hallway. For a moment, she stood there, motionless, watching their reflection vanish as the elevator descended. Then she returned to her desk, where she organized the day's remaining papers with her usual discipline. But that day she took a little longer than usual. And Lorenzo, as he got into the car, also waited longer than he normally would before asking the driver to leave. As if something new was trying to make itself known, but both of them were still pretending it was nothing. 2 weeks had passed. The light was beginning to reach Lorenzo's eyes, but the world still remained a blurred shadow. The doctors were pleased with the progress. Alessia, however, remained cautious. She continued to read every report before he did, filtering information, softening words that could provoke anxiety. He returned to the office more confident, though still dependent on her guidance. The building seemed smaller now that his steps were slow, deliberate, and his once commanding presence was tempered by uncertainty. Yet the employees still greeted him with respect, though now there was something new in their tone: compassion. Alessia noticed it first. Lorenzo didn't need pity. What he needed was control. So she rebuilt his world around sounds, words, and rhythm. She started labeling files with small audio notes, guiding him through schedules verbally. She read contracts aloud, adjusting her pace to match his breathing. Slowly, the symphony of her voice became his new way of navigating reality. One afternoon, as the rain hit the glass walls of the office, he called her into the room. "Close the door." His tone wasn't commanding, but weary. She obeyed. "I keep wondering," he began, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. "Why are you still here? You could have transferred to another department. Most people would have." "I didn't think about leaving." "Why not?" "Because someone needs to make sure you don't destroy everything while trying to rebuild it," she replied with quiet humor. For a second, he almost smiled. It was the first time in years that she'd seen his features relax. "Tell me," he said, turning slightly toward her voice. "How do you see me?" Alessia hesitated. "You mean professionally?" "No. In general." She exhaled. "You're disciplined, demanding, impatient, brilliant, but sometimes you use brilliance to distance yourself from people. You build walls faster than you build bridges." Lorenzo laughed, but there was no mockery in it. "I asked for honesty. I got it." She turned to leave, but his next question stopped her. "And you? What do you see in yourself?" "I'm someone who works well in silence. That's all." "No, it's not," he said firmly. "Silence is not the absence of sound. It's the presence of control. And you have more of it than anyone I've met." Her throat tightened. She didn't reply. That night, when the office emptied, Alessia lingered by the large window overlooking Milan. The city lights flickered below like fireflies, and she caught her own reflection in the glass. Always behind, always watching. But for the first time, she allowed herself to admit that something inside her had shifted. It wasn't love. Not yet. But it was a connection born out of survival, trust, and the unspoken awareness that both of them were slowly learning to see the world differently. Meanwhile, Lorenzo, alone in his apartment, sat on the edge of his bed. His phone was filled with unread messages, but he ignored them. He replayed Alessia's words in his mind, her calm, her honesty, the way she said things no one else dared to. And for the first time, he realized that her voice wasn't just part of his daily noise anymore. It was the sound of clarity, the sound of trust. 3 weeks after the accident, the doctors decided it was time to test Lorenzo's reaction to light again. Alessia accompanied him to the appointment, as she had every day since the beginning. She didn't speak much during the drive, but her hand rested firmly on the folder containing his medical documents. When the doctor removed the bandages, the room seemed too bright. Lorenzo's eyelids trembled at the first burst of light. After days of darkness, it felt violent, almost intrusive. "Can you see anything?" the doctor asked gently. He paused. "Shapes, shadows. Everything is blurry." "That's a positive sign," the doctor explained. "Your optic nerves are reacting again. We'll need gradual exposure, but if the recovery continues, you'll be able to distinguish objects soon." Alessia smiled faintly, but Lorenzo was quiet. He wasn't ready to celebrate something uncertain. In the following days, his progress was slow. He could now make out outlines, light against dark, movement through shadows. Yet, the world remained a painting out of focus. Still, it was enough for him to start moving more confidently. At the office, he insisted on returning to the conference room for meetings. Alessia sat beside him, discreetly describing what he couldn't yet see. The presentations, gestures, reactions. Her voice had become an extension of his perception. During one meeting, a director made a sarcastic remark about Lorenzo's temporary condition. The comment was disguised as humor, but Alessia caught the undertone. She leaned toward Lorenzo and whispered, "He's questioning your ability to lead." Lorenzo straightened his posture immediately. "Giovanni," he said, his tone steady, "when you manage to close half the deals I did last quarter, you'll earn the right to joke about my site." The room froze. The director muttered an apology, and the meeting continued in absolute order. Afterward, Lorenzo turned to Alessia. "How did you know?" "I could hear it in his voice," she said. He smiled. "So now you're my eyes and my instincts." I just translate what others don't say. That night, Alessia returned home later than usual. Sitting by the window with her hair down, she thought about how much had changed in such a short time. She had spent years working in the shadows, and now her presence was indispensable. But it wasn't just professional recognition. It was something deeper, unspoken, fragile, and dangerous. A few days later, Lorenzo called her into his office. "Sit," he said. His tone was serious but softer than usual. "I'll need you to handle all internal approvals for the next few weeks. The investors are nervous, and we can't show weakness." "Of course," she replied. "And Alessia?" he added, turning toward the faint sound of her breathing. "I trust you more than anyone right now." Those words settled in the air with unexpected weight. Alessia felt something shift again, something that couldn't be undone. But the moment was interrupted by the vibration of his phone. Lorenzo frowned. "It's my lawyer. Give me a moment." She stood up to leave, but as she did, she caught a glimpse of the name flashing on the screen. It wasn't the lawyer. It was a woman's name, Chiara. Alessia froze for a second. She remembered hearing that name once before, whispered among employees. The woman who had been engaged to Lorenzo years ago, the one who had left after a scandal no one dared to explain. Lorenzo noticed her hesitation. "Everything all right?" "Yes," she lied quickly. "Just the light. It's too strong. I'll dim it a little." He nodded, returning to the call. But Alessia's mind stayed elsewhere. Something told her that Chiara's sudden return wasn't coincidence. The reappearance of Chiara spread through the company like smoke. Quiet at first, but impossible to contain. She arrived one morning unannounced, wearing the same elegance that once turned heads at every event. Her perfume entered the room before her voice did, and when she greeted Lorenzo, her tone was perfectly measured. Familiar, nostalgic, confident. "Lorenzo," she said softly, her hand resting on his arm. "It's been too long." He recognized her instantly. Even with his vision still blurry, her silhouette was unmistakable. "Chiara," he replied, uncertain. "What are you doing here?" "I heard about the accident. I couldn't just stay away." "You don't have to face this alone." Alessia watched from across the room, silent. She had organized Lorenzo's morning schedule, prepared the meeting materials, and yet, at that moment, she felt invisible again. Chiara took the seat that Alessia had prepared for herself and began talking as if she had never left. Within days, Chiara's presence became constant. She offered to help with communication to the board, volunteered to attend meetings in Lorenzo's place, and even began advising the PR department. To the outside world, it looked like an act of devotion. To Alessia, it felt like intrusion. Lorenzo, still unable to see clearly, couldn't perceive the small shifts around him, the misplaced documents, the conversations that stopped when he entered the room, the subtle manipulation hidden behind Chiara's kindness. It started with a contract. "Lorenzo," Chiara said one afternoon, "I've been talking with the legal team. They've prepared a restructuring draft for the foundation. It'll simplify operations while you recover." Alessia's attention sharpened immediately. "Which draft?" she asked. Chiara's smile didn't falter. "Just a standard management adjustment. Nothing major." But Alessia had seen enough contracts to know that standard rarely meant harmless. When she received a copy to file, she stayed late at the office to read it. Line after line, she saw clauses that didn't match company protocol, transfers of authority, redirections of assets. Hidden among the legal jargon, one section stood out. An authorization that would grant Chiara control over several accounts in Lorenzo's name. The next morning, Alessia confronted her privately in the hallway. "I know what you're doing," she said in a steady voice. Chiara's expression didn't change. "You should be careful, Alessia. You're just an assistant. Don't get involved in things you don't understand." "I understand enough to know you're lying." Chiara stepped closer, her smile razor-sharp. "And what will you do? Tell him? He trusts me. You think he'll believe the quiet girl who spent years taking notes in the corner?" Alessia didn't answer. She simply turned and walked away, but her hands were shaking. That night, she took the document home, read it again and decided to act. The next morning, she went directly to the company's legal department, requested an internal verification, and within hours, the lawyers confirmed what she feared. The contract was fraudulent. When Lorenzo arrived, Alessia waited until Chiara left the room. "There's something you need to know," she said quietly. She placed the document in front of him and explained everything. The hidden clauses, the false signatures, the manipulation. Lorenzo listened in silence, jaw tightening as every word sank in. I can't believe this," he muttered. "Chiara would never." "She already did," Alessia interrupted, not unkindly. For a moment, Lorenzo didn't speak. Then, slowly, he reached out, his fingers brushing the paper as if trying to see through touch. "You saved me," he said finally. "I just did my job." "No," he replied, his voice low, almost broken. "You did much more than that." That night, Chiara disappeared as suddenly as she had returned. And for the first time since the accident, Lorenzo felt the full weight of the darkness. Not because he couldn't see, but because he finally understood who had truly been beside him all along. After the incident with Chiara, everything inside Studio Bianchi changed. Lorenzo's trust in people became fragile, almost brittle. He spoke less, listened more, and the few words he exchanged with Alessia carried the kind of weight that silence amplifies. Days turned into weeks. The scandal never reached the press. The fraudulent contract was buried quietly, handled internally by the legal team. Chiara had vanished without a trace. Yet her presence lingered in the air like a perfume that refused to fade. Lorenzo worked longer hours, often sitting in his office long after everyone had gone home. Alessia stayed too, organizing papers that didn't need organizing, pretending the distance between them was just part of the job. The recovery of his sight was progressing. Slowly, the shapes became clearer, the colors more defined. By now, he could make out silhouettes, the outlines of faces. But he hesitated to admit it. Maybe part of him didn't want the world to return completely. Maybe the darkness had forced him to see things that light would only distort again. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Alessia entered the office carrying a folder. "You didn't approve the supplier's list," she said, placing it on the table. Lorenzo looked toward her voice. He could see her shape now, the faint movement of her hand, the glimmer of light on her hair, but he said nothing. "I'll review it tomorrow," he replied. She nodded, turning to leave, but his voice stopped her. "Why are you avoiding me?" The question caught her off guard. "I'm not." "Yes, you are," he said quietly but firmly. "You come in, talk about work, and disappear. You used to tell me things. Now you barely speak." Alessia hesitated. Her instinct was to stay silent, to let the moment pass. But she couldn't. "I thought it would be easier," she said at last. "You're getting better, and soon you won't need me." Lorenzo frowned. "Is that what you think this is about?" "I know my place, Mr. Bianchi. I was here to assist you, not to—" "Not to what?" he interrupted. Her voice faltered. "Not to cross lines that shouldn't be crossed." He stood slowly, tracing the edge of the desk as if measuring his next words. "You think helping me, protecting me, saving me from someone like Chiara was crossing a line? That's not what I meant." "Then what do you mean, Alessia?" She exhaled, her composure breaking just enough for truth to slip through. "I mean that since the day of the accident, I've stopped knowing where the line is. I can't tell anymore if I'm doing this because it's my job, or because it matters to me." The air between them felt electric, fragile. Lorenzo's voice softened. "You were the only one who saw me when no one else did. Even when I couldn't see anything, you were the only thing I could trust. And now that the light is coming back, I don't want to lose that." Alessia blinked rapidly, her pulse racing. "You don't need me anymore." He took a step closer. "That's where you're wrong." But before he could say anything more, the door opened, an assistant announcing his next appointment. The moment shattered like glass. Alessia gathered the remaining papers and left the room before he could stop her. That night, she sat at home, staring at her reflection in the dark window. For years, she had been invisible. Then, for a moment, she had been seen. Now, She didn't know which hurt more, being unseen again or being remembered for the wrong reasons. And Lorenzo, alone in his office, replayed her words in his head. The woman who lived in silence had become his voice, and now her absence was louder than any sound he had ever known. The following week, Lorenzo returned to the hospital for what would be his final evaluation. The doctor smiled after the examination, satisfied. "Congratulations, Mr. Bianchi. Your vision has almost fully recovered. There may still be minor blurriness, but you're past the critical stage." He nodded, though his face didn't reflect joy. Something in him felt heavier than before. On the drive back, he was quiet. Alessia sat beside him, reading the messages that had piled up during the morning. She spoke only when necessary, keeping her tone neutral. When they arrived at the office, Lorenzo turned to her. "You can take the afternoon off." "That's not necessary. It's not a request," he said, not unkindly. She hesitated, then nodded. "All right, I'll leave after sending the investor report." But she didn't. Instead, she went to the conference room, where she could see Lorenzo through the glass wall, seated at his desk, staring out the window. For a long time, he didn't move. It was the same man who once commanded entire teams with his presence. But now he seemed unsure of what to do with the world he'd regained. That night, Lorenzo went home alone. The apartment was immaculate, silent, lifeless. For the first time, he turned on all the lights, not to see but to prove he could. Yet, the brightness made everything feel cold, distant. He poured himself a glass of wine and sat on the couch. The shadows cast by the lamp moved gently across the walls, and in them, he thought he saw traces of the weeks gone by. The sound of Alessia's voice reading contracts, the scent of her perfume mixed with the sterile air of the hospital, the echo of her calm footsteps. He realized something terrifying. He didn't miss his sight as much as he missed her presence. The next morning, Alessia arrived early, as always. She had promised herself she would keep things strictly professional. No personal involvement, no confusion. She went through emails, adjusted reports, and walked into his office to leave the daily agenda. But when she entered, Lorenzo was already standing by the window, watching the city with focused eyes. "You can see again," she said softly. He turned. "Mostly, yes. The world looks familiar, but not the same." "I'm glad," she said, forcing a smile. "You deserve it." "Do I?" Her brows furrowed. "Of course. You've worked harder than anyone I know." "Maybe that's the problem," he said, taking a step closer. "Working so hard that I forgot how to live." She tried to redirect the conversation. "You have a meeting in 10 minutes. "Alessia," he interrupted gently. "Why do you keep running away from me?" She froze. "I'm not running. I'm doing my job." He smiled faintly. "That's what you always say when you're scared." "I'm not scared." "Then look at me," he said quietly. She did, and for the first time their eyes met fully. There was no shadow between them, no blindness to hide behind. "Everything you see now," she said, voice trembling, "is temporary. One day you'll forget what it felt like not to see. You'll go back to being who you were before. And I'll still be here, behind the glass." He shook his head slowly. "No, because now I know what I was blind to all along." The air between them grew still, charged with everything they hadn't said. Then a knock at the door broke the silence. A director entered with a stack of papers. Alessia stepped back immediately, returning to her composed posture. Lorenzo took the documents, but his eyes lingered on her for a moment longer. When she left the room, her heart was pounding. She could still feel his gaze on her, the same eyes that had once seen nothing at all, now seeing everything too clearly. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Lorenzo stood in front of her, eyes finally clear, but still unsure of what to do with the new clarity. Alessia kept her arms crossed gently over her chest, her posture calm, though inside her heart was racing. "I needed to know," he finally said, "if what I felt when I couldn't see was real, or just a side effect of the darkness." "And what did you find out?" she asked, steady but quiet. "That it was real." The words hung in the air, trembling like fragile glass. Alessia looked away for a moment, searching for composure. Lorenzo, everything that happened, your accident, the recovery, it changed both of us. But the world doesn't stop for feelings that were born in the dark. He took a step closer. No, it doesn't. But maybe those are the only feelings that matter, the ones that survive even when you can't see them. She wanted to believe him, but her mind reminded her of all the years she had spent unseen, unnoticed, invisible. You see me now, she said softly. But soon you'll be surrounded again by people, by light, by the noise of everything you left behind. And I'll fade into the background, like before. Lorenzo shook his head. No, I don't want to go back to before. Then what do you want? He hesitated, searching for words that could hold the weight of truth. I want to start over, not as the man who commands, but as the man who learned to see through someone else's eyes. I want to build something new with you. Her throat tightened. She didn't trust herself to speak. The wind brushed through the trees, carrying the faint scent of lavender from the garden. It reminded her of the first morning she described the world to him. The color of the sky, the shape of the trees, the sound of footsteps. You don't owe me anything, she whispered. I know, he said. That's why it means everything. Silence again. Only this time it didn't feel heavy. Felt full, alive. Then Alessia smiled faintly. And what if I'm still afraid of the light? Then let's face it together. He extended his hand. For a brief moment, she hesitated. Then she took it. The contact was simple, but it felt like the closing of a circle. From the sterile white of the hospital to the dim corridors of the office, from the stage lights to this quiet garden, everything had led them there. Lorenzo looked around slowly, taking in the details he had longed for. The blue of the sky, the brightness of the grass, and finally the woman standing before him, the same one who had been beside him when everything was dark. You know, he said quietly, I thought I was afraid of not seeing again, but now I realize I was more afraid of losing what I found when I couldn't. Alessia squeezed his hand gently. Then don't lose it. Keep it. Just see the world. And me. The same way you did when everything was black. He smiled. A small, peaceful smile that reached his eyes. The light reflected softly on both of them as the camera of life pulled back, framing them against the endless skyline of Milan. In the distance, the bells of a nearby church began to ring. Lorenzo turned to her. Ready? For what? For whatever comes next, he said. And for the first time, Alessia didn't look away. She nodded. Ready. As they walked side by side through the garden, the scene faded slowly. Not into darkness this time, but into light. And you, do you believe love can be born in the dark? Tell us in the comments what you thought of this story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell for more stories like this one. See you in the next video.